My name is Day Zhang. I'm a librarian and a board member for Action for Media Education. Welcome to another edition of our Media Literacy Champions Spotlight. For the past decade, one Washington state lawmaker has been a consistent champion for one of the most pressing issues facing students today, and that's helping them navigate a media environment that's more complex, more manipulative, and more consequential than at any other point, probably in history. Senator Marko Liias has been the primary sponsor for Washington's media literacy legislation since 2016, when our state passed a first of its kind media literacy law. And he joins us today. Senator Liias, welcome.
Thanks so much. It's always great to chat with a librarian, so I'm glad to be with you.
It's great to be with you as well. So can we maybe just give a little bit of context for folks? Um, Tell us a little bit about your background and how did you become a state senator?
I'm a lifelong Washingtonian. I actually have the special opportunity to represent the communities that I grew up in Edmonds and Mukilteo, South Snohomish County. I was born and raised here, went to local public schools, got my degree, was the first in my family to graduate from college. I went back east and quickly came back home and sort of planted my roots in the community, got more involved. That led me at one point to run for city council. I was on the Mukilteo City Council for a couple years, and then kind of getting involved in politics and governance led me to the legislature. I was at the time I was appointed to the House in 2008. I was Washington's youngest member of the legislature. Then it wasn't the youngest ever, but I was the youngest in that moment. And then I served in the House for a few years, and then my senator retired, so I moved to the state Senate. So kind of rooted in the community I grew up in, working on issues that I hear about from our community, which is also kind of what led me to media literacy, media education as well.
Yeah, that's so great. So let's go back to the beginning of media literacy legislation. Maybe it was late 2015 or so that AIM came to your office with an idea. At the time, our president, Claire Beach, and the team kind of proposed what would become the first media literacy bill in the nation. What was kind of your reaction to those conversations? What did they bring to you, and how did you kind of work on that legislative effort?
Yeah, I think what really brought me to this work was my advocacy on school safety and school bullying. As a member of the LGBTQ community, I was really committed to trying to make our schools a safer place for all kids, but particularly kids who identify as LGBTQ. And I'd done some work at the state level to create statewide policy around that. And Claire, who was an educator in my local public schools in Edmonds, had seen that work, and she reached out, like, kind of as a constituent, to say, hey, I want to talk to you about an issue that's important to me. So of course I love to meet with constituents and hear about their issues. And she articulated, I think, really clearly that if you want to address school safety and school bullying, you also have to kind of go upstream and look at how are students engaging, how are young people engaging with technology, how are they getting information, how are they using the online tools that they have at their disposal in ethical and responsible ways, and that was sort of deeply intertwined with school bullying. And of course, I'd done enough work to see that connection really was already clear to me from the work I'd been doing, but she articulated it through that frame of, like, if we want to really unwind this issue, we have to go upstream and think about how students are engaging with media as well as a really important component of tackling safety for our young people as well.
Yeah, thank you for listening to your constituents. Um, what does that kind of educator and lawmaker collaboration look like in your view, like when it's at its best? And how can we have more of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of Washingtonians don't realize, or maybe have forgotten, that our legislature is a citizen legislature. So those of us that serve in the state and are in the state house and the state senate are part-time. We only meet in Olympia for a few months of the year. And then the rest of the time we live in community with everybody else. Most of us have other employment because it is a part-time role being a legislator. And so it is really critically important. And I would say all of my colleagues, we all shop at the same grocery stores as our constituents, go to the same parks as our constituents, use the same services and community. And so I think there's a sense because of politics at the national level that kind of those people are far away and aren't connected. And like I always try and reinforce that like we are living in the same places that our constituents are. And also we're seeing the same issues and the same challenges that our constituents are seeing because we all are sort of experiencing this together. And so reaching out to help your lawmaker understand an issue is, first of all, part of the system that we've designed. Secondly, as citizen lawmakers, like we really rely on the expertise of the folks we represent to help us tackle technical or more detailed issues. And something like media literacy, media education in our public schools is something that obviously we all are interested in addressing, but how do we address it? We really need that kind of subject matter expertise of folks in our community to help us unwind that, untangle it, and get a sense of solutions. So, often I talk to constituents and they are like, is it okay if I share a concern? Like, yes, that's like literally why we exist, is to hear the concerns of folks that are in our community and try and come up with steps and solutions that can help address the problems people are seeing on the ground.
Yeah, yeah, that's so powerful. And what specifically did AIM or other educators bring that helped shape that legislation that was written, that first piece?
I mean, I think one thing was deep subject matter expertise. Obviously, the folks that are engaged in AIM come from various cross sections of this landscape. So, at that time, there was retired journalists, there was university researchers, there were educators like Claire. So, it's a cross section of folks working on this issue from multiple perspectives. We also had both public and private school educators. So we were hearing that, not just in our public K through 12 schools, but even in our parochial schools or our private schools, this was an issue. So this was broadly something that the education community was trying to work on. And, we had other experts in the broader community that were engaged. And then the other piece that AIM, because that deep university research background was there, was an understanding of what were other states or other jurisdictions doing about it, so we could sort of put our Washington state approach in a context, as well as a connection to national groups like Common Sense Media and others that are also working on this. So it's kind of as a lawmaker, when people, right, they're seeing a challenge out there and they're like, I need help with this. AIM came not just with the problem statement, but with sort of a toolkit of some potential solutions as well. And that was really, really helpful.
Yeah. And this has been going on for a decade now, right? So taking the long view, what kept this partnership going across multiple sessions? What kind of gave you fuel and helped you to continue pushing and continue, collaborating and trying to get further in terms
Yeah,
of building the framework?
I think sort of two things. First of all, the problem is not going away and it's not getting easier or more simple. It's getting more complicated. Like the media landscape, the information that our young people are being exposed to is getting more fragmented and harder to navigate. So honestly, I feel like we took action like, you know, looking back 10 years at a time that like was much simpler and easier. It didn't feel simple or easy at the time, but in the landscape we're in right now, it feels like, gosh, that was like sort of good old days, even though it was really scary and hard to navigate in that moment. The other piece is, the folks engaged in AIM like are fearless and are also just dedicated to this issue. So the team and the coalition weren't like one and done, like, okay, we've solved it. We knew from the outset this was going to be iterative. We also knew that the media landscape was shifting, and so we needed to sort of continue to follow it. And there hasn't been a single year where AIM and the team haven't said, hey, what can we do this year on this issue? So, like, there's just been that kind of faithful advocacy across time, that persistence. And then, anybody looking at the world around us understands that this is not getting easier, it's getting harder. And of course, we need to continue to press forward and find new solutions, new tools, new interventions that can sort of drive us in the same towards the same goal of helping young people navigate an increasingly fragmented and decentralized and, complex media landscape.
Yeah. In a minute, we'll get to more of your thoughts on that media landscape and what we can do moving forward. Um, I, you talked about how we've had a kind of a decade now of investment. So just to recap for the audience, part of that started with curriculum grants. Then we had professional learning communities. We tried to get regional conferences going, and we actually were able to um, implement the first media literacy supervisory type position in the country, which was at OSPI, and an ambassador program. So, a recent national report by Media Literacy Now identified Washington as one of the strongest implementation models in the country. And you mentioned kind of the iterative process. When you talk to teachers or school leaders here, what do you actually hear? What has changed in the classroom? Where are we now versus a decade ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think a decade ago we had I would say in many cases, isolated and disconnected practitioners that were trying to do the right thing. There was Claire Beach was a great example of one educator in one community doing really amazing things. And I think we had, let's say dozens of Claires around Washington State, but they didn't have, other than like kind of stumbling upon one another, didn't have a community or those connections, and they weren't able to sort of pull resources and approaches. And I think the strength of our approach to implementation has been this is not going to be a top-down state mandate. This is going to be sort of the state setting a goal and a framework and then connecting the people that are doing this work together and then helping the people like Claire, the sort of lighthouses out there sort of show the way to the broader education community. And we were lucky that this movement towards media literacy, media education coincided with a general trend in our K through 12 policy of trying to create electronic resources and disseminate them. Like it wasn't just for media education, it was more broadly. We wanted to kind of connect people across schools, and we created some online platforms to share curriculum and share information on issues. And this topic area sort of arrived at the same time that some of those tools were coming on board. So, there was organic interest already. People were doing this work. And then we sort of married them with platforms and solutions where they could share with each other and collaborate across spaces. I think if we hadn't had folks like Claire and dozens others across the state, we wouldn't have had as much success. But we had people doing the work. We just needed to empower and connect them. And once we did, that was sort of put us on a path. And then the problem has only gotten worse. So other educators, when they saw like, wow, I wasn't even thinking about this, but of course these resources exist. I want to use them now. I want to plug into it. So, Victor Hugo famously said, there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And we sort of like met our moment where we had resources, we were connecting people right when society was looking and saying, we should be doing something about this. And so we had some, solutions or strategies or some things that people could do right at the moment that people were sort of looking for them.
Right. So Illinois passed a mandate for media literacy in 2021, and some of their advocates now say it needs real investment in teacher training in order to work. And so we were kind of early on in really putting in some of that infrastructure. Do you see a risk in losing momentum or the impact if we don't continue to put those resources in that we've started?
Yeah, I mean, I think we also started this pathway at a time when, you know, the state budget was under some constraint. And so we had to kind of bootstrap some solutions. Like we didn't have millions of dollars to come in and help us solve this. Like we had to sort of figure out what with the resources that were out there, with the people that were out there, how could we sort of elegantly construct some approaches that would utilize all that existing momentum and just sort of help spread it. And so I think it has made this implementation effort more future proof because there isn't a $10 million state grant that could be canceled and then we would lose momentum. Like this has never been like really deeply funded. And so when funding dries up, we still have these structures, we still have this sort of architecture to move the ball forward. And so, I remember in the early days that was a source of frustration. Like I wish we had more resources for this. Candidly, I think looking back over 10 years, I'm a little happy we didn't have one giant set of resources because I think it would have been like a bunch and then it would have gone away. We've had to sort of sustain this with all kinds of energy and all kinds of resource and all kinds of can-do attitude in a way that has given it some staying power. And, you know, this is a thing that educators want support and help on. And so, that helps, right? When teachers want these resources, then the resources we create are being used and it creates this sort of virtuous cycle of like, let's do more because people are going to use them. So, of course, it would have been great to have tons of resources. Who doesn't want tons of resources? But that's just not where education policy and support is right now. Our state is constrained across time. So I think learning how to do this in a more scarce environment made us scrappier, also made us really lean into kind of people power and connecting folks that were doing this in ways that give us staying power. And we need to continue to make investments into this architecture and infrastructure. But I think at the core of it, this is still a people-driven, a people-centered approach where we're taking smart practitioners, giving them a little bit of resource to spread what they're doing, and then relying on that kind of can-do approach to get it done.
Yeah, it's very grassroots. Uh, so let's switch a bit to the current moment, as you've alluded to. So just this month, the New York Times published an investigation drawing on internal documents from more than 1,400 lawsuits filed by school districts against Meta, Snap, TikTok, YouTube. These documents show that, for example, TikTok's own safety teams pushed for years to disable notifications during school hours. And then they were kind of just, brushed aside. Snap's internal strategy documents, they referred to classroom use as under the desk time. As someone who's been working on this since 2016, what does it mean to see some of those internal decisions, maybe confirmed, or what does that say about the fight or the issues that we're experiencing?
Yeah, I think, across American society, we are seeing what happens when we let unregulated, you know, billionaire funded activities take place across our economy. And this was one of those where social media was not regulated. It had tremendous dollars and weight behind it. And we've seen, what impact that's had on American society, right? And it is certainly undermining the foundations of our democracy, but even more troubling is the impacts it's had on a generation of young people and their growth and development. And I think we can never go back in time. And there is a generation that I think just has suffered damage from these tools, from the mental health to the educational outcomes to so many other things. What I want us to focus on is how do we learn from this moment and what clearly was a mistaken and damaging approach and do it differently as we move forward. There's no question that the companies that were making millions and billions of dollars off of these platforms knew the impacts that their technologies were having. And, I don't want to be too histrionic about it, but it does remind me a lot of what the oil companies knew about climate change or what the tobacco companies knew about their products. Like it is clear that this industry knew the impacts they were having on children, and they were making too much money to do anything about it. And that's the role of broader society to step in and intervene and say, we are not going to allow our children to be commodities that are going to be traded by giant multinational corporations. Like we need to step in and take steps as a society to protect our kids, but also not just to protect our kids. How do we make sure our kids are resilient? Because these trends are not going away. They are only going to get more severe and more intense across time. So, but we do need to learn the lesson, right? I mean, Canada's moving forward with a ban. Australia has implemented age restrictions. Like, I do think as a community, we need to sort of look back at the last 10 years and say, that was a horrific failure from a kind of social perspective, and how do we do it differently moving forward and learn the lessons of this moment to protect our kids and to protect our democracy and other critical institutions that keep our country strong.
Yeah. And the media landscape keeps shifting. So one of the big new developments now that everyone's talking about is generative AI. In addition to the things that we have dealt with for years, algorithmic um, feeds, but now we have synthetic media, right, in the form of AI. What does this new chapter look like from where you sit, and what does Washington, in your mind, need to do?
I mean, I think that we had a few decades, a couple generations of stable, unbiased, nonpartisan media. And I think, we need to sort of acknowledge that that was the exception, not the norm. Like, I think those of us that grew up in that era where you could turn on the evening news or open the newspaper and trust that what you were receiving had been vetted and checked, like that was a delightful, beautiful moment, but that was not normal, and it isn't going to be the trend into the future. And honestly, if we can navigate how to make our next generation better, more skeptical, more thoughtful consumers of media, like that is probably in a democracy the way that things should have always been. And we were sort of lucky, and it was this interesting moment where we got to have something different. But in the long term, teaching our young people to be critical consumers of information is what we need to make our democracy healthy and strong. I'm really guided. My family immigrated from Finland, and Finland, because of their location next to a very large and hostile neighbor across time, they have always taught this sort of skepticism and critical consumption of media because they have been the sort of targets or recipients of disinformation, misinformation, like before the internet existed. Like there has been an effort in the Soviet period and post the collapse of the Soviet Union to do this sort of manipulation using information across time. So they just sort of a generation ago said, hey, we see this is just the norm. We're going to make sure that we embed kind of critical analysis of media into just the toolkit of democracy. And I think that is what we should have been doing, and certainly in this moment, what we need to do more moving forward. Whether it's AI or whatever comes next, like it's clear that there isn't going to be like one touchstone, one shared source that we can all rely on. We need to learn how to be critical consumers, how to be critical thinkers. That is, I think, how we future-proof ourselves and our kids and our society. And that's why media literacy, media education is so critically important, because this is probably what needed to happen anyway. And certainly this set of situations we've been in has showed us that it's more important now than ever.
Right, right. And AI literacy is a very catchy term right now, but like you, I just bring it back to media literacy, right? Because the principles are the same. And how do we strengthen democracy and become future-proof, as you mentioned? Do you see this needing to be integrated in civics? Maybe investments in journalism? What are different things we can do to strengthen that democracy and improve our ability to have conversations with each other and make tough decisions, as a society?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we rely on the private sector to deliver all of this for us, like we're only going to get those things that are profitable across time. And if it's not profitable, and I would argue that sort of having a healthy and strong democracy is not really a profit center. It is part of the fabric of our society. If we want a healthy and strong democracy, then that's going to take public investment and public commitment. Our First Amendment, if we just rely on the profit motive to deliver us information that helps us make good choices as citizens in this democracy, like we're not going to get a complete picture. So I do think we need public investments in journalism. I do think we need public investments in, understanding how our democracy works. I do think we need public investments in critical thinking. Like that is, when you go back to the founders of this country, and this is America 250, so we're thinking about that founding moment a lot this year and this month. Like the reason why our founders were so committed to public education was because they knew a democracy won't work if citizens can't critically consume information and think critically. Like the ability to hear an argument and discern whether or not it makes sense, whether or not there's evidence to support it. Like that's been a skill that we've needed in our democracy for 250 years. This is a skill we're going to need for 250 more years. And no matter what the way that we get information, no matter what form it comes in, whether it's a manipulated video or, an old school newspaper back in the day, either way, we need citizens that can receive that information and say, does this make sense? How do I validate it? What do I trust? What is my worldview? And as I'm in the classroom teaching community college course right now, like my number one lesson to my students is like there are multiple answers to these questions. The issue is the critical piece of it is how are we individually coming up with our answers to these questions? Like, should we go in this direction or should we go in that direction as a country? Like, it's for us all to decide together. So, how do we set the table where we can make those decisions together and do it in the best way possible?
Wow, I did not know you were teaching a community college course. What's your course?
The United States government. So, I
Oh, of
am
course.
well,
You're
teach
the
what you
perfect
know, teach what
teacher.
you know.
Awesome. Senator Marko Liias, 10 years, multiple laws, a model that states across the nation are still learning from, and we are still learning from. On behalf of Action for Media Education, thank you for your partnership in this work and for joining us today. To our audience, you can learn more about AIM's educational programs and Washington's media literacy journey at actionformediaeducation.org. Senator Liias, before I let you go, how can your constituents reach out to you and partner with you?
I mean, I hate to say this, but social media is such a powerful tool. So, that is a great way to connect and stay in touch, sort of day to day. But obviously, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on, the platforms that exist out there. But also, old fashioned email, sitting down for a cup of coffee. I mean, that's what Claire Beach did 10 years ago. We went, we grabbed a cup of coffee, we had a conversation, and it turned into this sort of 10-year journey of working together on these issues. So, to my constituents, I always love meeting folks out in community. And if we start on social media, let's move to real life conversation and tackle the issues that are important to our community moving forward.
That's awesome. Thank you for being so accessible to community members. And thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having me.